So today is a big one. It's a marathon recipe and it's the iconic Beef Wellington. And today I'll be guiding you through it step by step, so let's get started. First up, mushroom duxelle. Fancy name, but really it's just a mix of finely chopped mushrooms, shallots, garlic, mix of herbs cooked down into a flavorful paste. So into a hot pan, I'm just gonna add in some butter and just a tiny bit of oil. Once the butter's melted, I'm gonna add in some finely chopped shallots and garlic. Now I'm just gonna give it a minute or two for this to soften a little bit. And then in go the mushrooms. Now the mushrooms, I've given them a blitz in a food blender to get to this texture, but you can do this by hand if you wish. It's just gonna take you a little bit longer. At this point, I'm just gonna get a good pinch of salt in there, and the salt is gonna help draw out the moisture from the mushrooms. Next, I'm adding in a few sprigs of thyme in there. It's just the thyme leaves. So I'm just gonna simply run my finger down the stems and take the leaves off. Now I'm just gonna let this mixture cook over a medium heat, and this process would probably take about 30 to 35 minutes. But really you want to take your time with it and get as much of the moisture out of the mushrooms, and then you'll end up with a beautiful and flavorful paste. So all I'm gonna do is just mix it every 5 minutes. So this has now been about 30 minutes and the mushroom have now completely caramelized and it's turned into a paste-like consistency. Now I can just take this off the heat and then set it aside for it to chill. So like I mentioned, the key to a good Beef Wellington without a soggy bottom is to get as much of that moisture out of the mushrooms. So with that step, you really want to take your time with. And next is the star of the show. And I've got a lovely bit of tenderloin here, which I'm just going to season lightly. And then just a touch of oil into a hot pan, and in goes the beef. Now the goal here is not to cook this beef all the way through, but just to get a lovely crust on all sides. Now that the beef is lovely and browned on all sides, I'm just gonna brush it with a bit of Dijon mustard, or you can use English mustard if you prefer, and then we can just let this chill. Now I'm gonna set it aside to cool while we move on to the next stage of our build. And now comes the fun part, the assembly. So I'm gonna start by laying down a sheet of cling film onto the board, and I'm gonna overlap slices of prosciutto to create a base layer. And then I'm gonna spread that duxelle over the prosciutto. So the mushroom duxelle is spread out evenly, and it's about 1 centimeter thick, which is what you're after. Next, we want to place the rested beef onto that mixture, and then we want to roll it up tightly using the cling film. Once you've got enough cling film, with a knife, cut through. Now you want to grab the ends and then twist. And this step is key to getting that classic cylindrical shape and even cooking. And now we can pop this in the fridge for about 20 to 25 minutes for it to firm up. So now we're gonna move on to the next step. So just as we did before, I'm just gonna get a layer of that cling film onto my board. And now for the puff pastry. So I'm using a ready-made puff pastry. You can make your own, but let's face it, life is too short to make this from scratch. So now I'm just gonna gently lay that puff pastry over onto the cling film. Just lay it down as neatly as possible. Then I've got a couple of egg yolks here with just a tiny bit of milk added to it. And I'm just gonna give this puff pastry an egg wash. And what the egg wash will do is essentially as it cooks, it will thicken and just keep everything held together. Next, I'm gonna unwrap the beef, just making sure that the shape is kept as is and intact. Lay it over the pastry, and again, as we did before, we wanna use the cling film to roll the beef on top. And as with any excess, you can either just trim it off or just gently tuck them in. Again, I'm gonna use the cling film to roll the Wellington, and again, with a knife, cut through, pinch the ends, and just roll it on itself. So this now again goes back in the fridge for another 20 to 25 minutes, and then we can start baking. Now we're at the final stage. Before baking, we want to get a sheet of parchment paper big enough to lay the beef over. So I'm just going to gently unwrap the Wellington, seam side down. And now I'm just gonna give the Wellington an egg wash, making sure I don't miss any spots, essentially ensuring we get a beautiful golden brown all over. As I'm feeling fancy, I'm just gonna get a lattice layer on top for that stunning design. So I'll just place this back onto this tray, and I've got another sheet of puff pastry here, and I'm just gonna cut this out using the lattice cutter. And then with the lattice layer, I'll just simply drape it over the Wellington, adjusting the shapes without lifting it. Just going to cut the ends. And I'll just give it one more egg wash. And finally, this is ready for the oven. So I'm gonna take out my preheated tray and just simply lift the Wellington and place it onto the tray. So this now goes inside the oven, which is preheated at 200 degrees Celsius for about 25 to 30 minutes, depending on how well you want the beef to be cooked, and until that pastry is lovely and golden brown. And there it is, all looking lovely and golden, and we are now going to let this beautiful Wellington rest. And while the Wellington's resting, I'm just going to quickly prepare a lovely red wine jus to go with it. And if you want the recipe to a beautiful velvety red wine jus, I'll be leaving a link down in the description box below, and there you'll also find the recipe for this beautiful Wellington. That pastry is really lovely, it's flaky and the beef is really nice and tender. So there you have it, a beautiful beef Wellington, and I hope that you enjoyed this recipe, and if you did, do me a favor and give the video a thumbs up, share it with your friends and your loved ones, and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I'll be seeing you in the next one, hopefully really soon. Until then, look after yourselves and remember, the secret ingredient is love.